People are far better than their very worst deed. And Jodi Arias is a far better person than her very worst deed. Each and every one of you have your own moral decision that you have to make. Each and every one of you have to decide for yourselves if, despite her very worst deed, her life still has value. Back in December, when we first started choosing a jury, we all talked to you and asked you that question about whether or not if you found that somebody was guilty of a first-degree murder and it was cold-blooded and awful, could you still consider giving that person life in prison? And each one of you said that you could. This phase is different. It's different because the state of Arizona does not require you to execute somebody for first-degree murder. There is no requirement. In fact, the state of Arizona, the laws of Arizona, are always satisfied with life in prison. When we talk in this phase of the trial, it is different because we are now talking about a different burden. This whole time we have been talking about the burden of proof of beyond a reasonable doubt, and that the government had to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt, a very high standard. But we're no longer talking about beyond a reasonable doubt. And in fact, now the burden has changed. The burden has changed to a much lower standard, and the standard is now preponderance of the evidence. And what the judge has told you about preponderance of the evidence is that the defense, we have to prove to you now by a preponderance of the evidence that any mitigating factor is true. Preponderance of the evidence is a lower standard, and what that means is that we have to prove to you that a fact is more true than not true. A much lower standard beyond a reasonable doubt. Those mitigating factors are a very personal decision for you. Each juror can choose to believe a different mitigating factor. And so when you go back to deliberate, each juror can come back with a different mitigating factor, believing that the defense has proven a different mitigating factor. In other words, there could be a total of 12 different mitigating factors that you find. You don't have to agree with your neighbor. Your decision is your own personal choice. It is your own moral choice whether or not you find it to be more true than not, that there is a reason to find value with Jodi's life, that there is a reason to punish her with life in prison. You have every right to stand by your decision. And so whatever decision you make, you have every right to stand by it. You do not have to explain it to anybody else because it is your own moral decision to make. And remember, when we were talking to you back in December, when we first started choosing a jury, we talked to you about whether or not you could respect another juror's opinion. And that's what we're asking you to do now. Whatever your decision may be, it is your decision and yours to hold, and it is your personal decision to make. Mitigation is what we're talking about now. And the state has attempted to shape this case into something to be nothing more than lies and manipulation. Like somehow every word out of Jodi's mouth has been nothing more than a lie, and her own witnesses. That's what the state wants you to believe. And that somehow lying is appropriate now. That somehow the state believes because there's been lying that she should get the death penalty for that. But lying is not a capital crime. And lying does not get you the death penalty. And lying isn't even an aggravating factor. It doesn't even qualify someone to get the death penalty. Mitigating factors are reasons that give you a reason for you to believe that there is something of value in Jody's life. A reason to say that you can punish her with life in prison instead of execution. Mitigating factors are not excuses, and that is not why we're up here. They are not an excuse for what she did. You have already convicted her of first-degree murder for that. So we are not up here to talk about excuses for why she did it. Mitigating factors are reasons why you can find that they are sufficiently substantial to call for punishment of life in prison. Mitigating factors are completely unrelated to and separate from the first-degree murder conviction. And the judge read to you in those instructions that you have convicted her of first-degree murder. You've done that, and we're this far. But mitigating factors have nothing to do with excusing that crime, and they're completely unrelated and separate now from the actual crime itself. Mitigating factors are reasons that you can find that are sufficiently substantial to call for life in prison. It is very important to understand, and this is in your jury instructions, that mitigating factors are not reasons that have to be connected to the crime. You don't have to find any connection between a reason to give her life versus the crime itself. Mitigating factors are reasons that in fairness and in mercy, you can find that life in prison is the appropriate penalty.